Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Suzanne. I'm a compulsive eater. I'm abstinent today because I choose my meals off the Grey Sheet. I write them down, I commit them to my sponsor, and I eat them. And I eat nothing else, no matter what. And to do that, I make that my number one priority just for today. And I want to tell you a little bit of my story, but then also want to tell you a few things that I've learned. Um, because this is not my first time around this block. I'm currently 2.5 years abstinent, 2.5 years and a bit. Um, but I'm now 42, and when I first found Grey Sheet, I was in my early 20s. So you do the math, I have not been abstinent since I found this program. Um, I found this program in my early 20s in a very desperate state. You know, I had been vegan for a few years, holding completely to that diet, eating extremely low calories, doing a lot of exercise. And somehow I had that. At that time, I had the discipline to do that until I broke that with one bite, with one meal. Deliberately, I was going out for my birthday with some friends, and it opened the floodgates. It opened a dam. It was like the dam broke, and there was just this desperate eating that from like for a few years was just trapped in. And I mean eating to the point of stomach pain so much I could only shallowly breathe, desperately trying to throw up and being unable to. I would have loved to be able to be a bulimic, but unfortunately, well, fortunately, that was never possible. Um, yeah, and just I gained something like 40, 50 pounds in the space of a couple of months, and people were seeing it, and people were wondering. They were too polite to ask, but I knew they knew. They knew. It was it was a really desperate place to be. And I moved to New York. I was trying to I was running away from my issues, and unfortunately, the issues came along. And after a few months, I was in New York. This is sort of the early 2000s. So the internet was there. I Googled help for overeating, and I found Grey Sheet. So I never went to OA. I've never been to any other program. I just happened to come across Grey Sheet, and I happened to be in Manhattan. And so I was able to go and um, you know, actually go to live meetings. And I was given the Grey Sheet. Somebody sat down with me and annotated that Grey Sheet with me and walked through it. What do I do? How do I do it? Where do I go next after this meeting? It was literally like that, direction. This is the grocery store where you're gonna get this, and that. This is gonna be dinner. This is gonna be breakfast. And that, yeah, I'm so grateful to have had that, to have seen that. In that meeting, people were telling my story, and I knew that I belonged. And yet, and yet, I managed this for about 2 weeks before I decided this is way too intense. This is just, this is hitting a kind of this is hitting a nail with a nuclear bomb. This is too much for my problem. My problem's not that big. And I left. But I kept the Grey Sheet as a souvenir, put it in a book, moved again a year later because my problems were coming again, and so I tried to move away, moved to Maryland that time, um, and but with the book that had the Grey Sheet in it, which a few months later I dug out, found, and I was desperate enough to get abstinent there. There were no meetings there. All I had was the phone bridge and the GreyNet, and I would post every day on the GreyNet. I was on phone meetings all the time. I got a sponsor and I got abstinent, and I stayed abstinent for years. A few years in Maryland, and then I had to leave America because my visa ran out. And I took Grey Sheet with me. I was abstinent, moving back to England. Moved into a house share with four South African girls about my age, sort of in their 20s. They had a little box room, and I hadn't met them before, but we had made these arrangements kind of via email and things. And I walked in there, and they were like, "Ah, nice to meet you. How are you?" I was like, "I need a space in the fridge." That the priority was in place at the time. Um, but the couple of years in England, I was not accessing the phone. I was not accessing the phone meetings. I wasn't accessing many other meetings. There was a London meeting, and I would go there occasionally, but I wasn't living in London and it was expensive and it was difficult to get there. And those were my excuses. Basically, I was not making myself part of the fellowship. And so I wasn't hearing my story and I wasn't hearing other people's stories. And instead, what I heard was a lot of people around me going, this is just really extreme. What you're doing is just really extreme. Why can't you just relax a little bit, you know? And it was a bit of that drip feed. Give it a few years, give it a few years. I stayed abstinent for a while. I remained, I had a sponsor that whole time, but that was my extent really of my involvement with GreySheet. Until I decided, yeah, this really is too much. This is too extreme. I'm going. And I chose to leave. And yes, every time that is my story. Every time I have left GreySheet, it was a choice. I've never accidentally put something in my mouth. It was always a choice, and that choice always came from somewhere. And so the last time I came back 2.5 years ago. This is after 10 years away. I had left 10 years previously, deciding once again, this just was a bit too much because again, I was doing it without being part of the community. And so after those 10 years, where I was 2.5 years, 3 years ago, I was in a place where I was eating one meal a day. I was fasting for 23 hours a day. So even with that, and I mean, I hate fasting. Let me just tell you, I did not do this because I wanted to. It was torture. It was awful. And I was hungry all the time. Absolutely awful for my kids as well to be around somebody like that. But it was the only way I could stop myself from blowing up like a balloon. It just, as even so, with that 1 hour of eating that I had in a day, I was 20 kilos more than I am now. And my weight was going up. And that got me to my absolute bottom because I was like, I cannot eat less. Like, when I'm eating, I have no control whatsoever. I cannot eat for a while, but not forever. And I'm gaining the weight. What more can I do? So that was my absolute bottom. There's kind of complete despair of I'm not eating, and yet, most of the time I'm not eating, and yet I'm fat and I'm getting fatter. Um, and I had forgotten about GreySheets. I'll be honest, 10 years away, I had really completely forgotten about it. I didn't have a GreySheet anymore. Um, and I just didn't have a solution. I was at the bottom and I didn't have a solution and I didn't think about the GreySheet. And what happened was I had a dream. I woke up one morning and I had dreamed about putting my food on a scale. So my subconscious obviously remembered, even though I didn't. And that day, I Googled it. GreySheet is still there. I made the phone call and and I felt like I had stepped onto one of those walkways in an airport, It's like I'm on there and suddenly this is going. Suddenly I have a temp sponsor and then I get a permanent sponsor. And it's all kind of, the wheels are in motion. And it felt like coming home. It really felt like here's this glove that was made for my hands and I'm just putting it in there and it's comfortable. And that is what GreySheet is for me. Is the food is a foundation from which I build my life. So I don't live for the food and the diet and my looks and my eating. This is not what I'm living for now. When my food is on the scale, then when I'm not eating it, I am not under it. I am not dealing with it all the time. I'm not dealing with the thoughts all the time. I had initially 2 weeks of feeling very, very hungry, just physically hungry. Um, but other than that, after those 2 weeks, my body adjusted. And I'm still to this day, 2.5 years later, every morning, I'm so grateful I get to eat breakfast. Because for so long with the fasting, it was always dinner I could eat. So it's like the whole day I'm hungry and miserable, waiting for dinner. And so now I wake up and I'm like, yes, I get to eat. And it's my favorite meal and it's wonderful. And so where am I now? Well, things that I've learned. One thing is I make myself part of the community. Zoom makes this a lot easier than it used to be. But also I choose to serve. So, I do things like I'm a registrar and I help at various meetings in various positions because I want to be in the community. I want to help the community. But equally, I try to hold these services lightly. So if someone came along and say, I want to be registrar now, or if they told me you're not doing a good enough job, we need someone else to do it, it's not my thing to have. I'm just kind of trying to, thank you very much, Nancy. I'm just trying to put into this program something, give back, and also to be known. It helps to speak up. So I try to be part of, I try to speak out and be part of the whole thing because being on the sidelines, I can take myself out of that so easily. And I can hold on to abstinence for a little while. I've showed myself that, but it's never permanent. I have to keep it green because over time, otherwise it just becomes, yeah, I'm actually okay. Life is flowing. I'm all right. And I forget that the foundation of it all is what I do with the food. I just forget that part. And that that is why I have to come back to meetings, and that's why I have to keep hearing this message. And the other thing that I've learned in previous abstinences is I have to really enjoy my food. I have to enjoy my food. If I can deal with food, a meal not being great, I can deal with a week's meals not being great if I'm on a holiday or something. It's fine, it's fine. But when it's months of it and I'm restricting myself from foods that are abstinent, but I, for some reason, decide to not have them, that is where I go, eventually where I go out. So what's for me, the paradox is I'm not usually tempted by non-abstinent foods. So my kids, my family, they don't eat abstinent. There's food in the house that I don't eat, but it doesn't call to me because I know mine is not my food. It's not a question mark. As soon as it's a question mark, it will call to me. But because it isn't, there's no, there is peace around it. So I'm not tempted to have that food. Sometimes if I feel like, oh, this looks good, very quickly I redirect and it doesn't stay, it doesn't obsess, my brain doesn't obsess about it. But where I go is I go to restriction first. That is my disease. My disease is like, oh, but I could cut out dairy and maybe I'll be healthier. There's nothing wrong with me. I have no illnesses, but this is where my head goes. Or maybe I could cut out nightshades and I'll experience all these health benefits. And again, there isn't anything wrong. But this is where, on the gray sheet, if I take out stuff, I have now learned that that takes me to a dangerous place and I will not do it. So for me, the gray sheet has to define my abstinence rather than myself defining it, because I will cut and cut and cut and cut, and I will end up with food I don't love. I will end up with food that doesn't excite me or that I don't look forward to. And then after a little while, I'm very easy pickings because honestly, that's, I love food. I am wired this way, and I am grateful that Grey Sheet doesn't try to change this very basic wiring within me. I love food. I enjoy food, and on Grey Sheet I'm able to. And I'm also somebody who loves to eat a lot of food. So there are certain items on Grey Sheet where we get less of. I never eat those. I can't be asked. I'm not wasting a meal on that. Um, I want to eat as much as I possibly can on the Grey Sheet, and people often comment if I eat out, especially if it's dinner. My word, that's some salad. I'm like, yeah, and it's all mine, and it goes, and it'll all be gone by the end of dinner. And, and sometimes I get comments, and I always try to kind of make a joke of it. I don't feel that people are judging that. They're just amazed, and that's fair enough. Um, thank you, Nancy. I love being able to eat what we get to eat. I love being able to enjoy my food and not feel judged about it or feel ashamed about it. My food is my food. At the beginning, I would not show anybody what I did. I wouldn't go out. Thank goodness I got abstinent in a pandemic, so there was no issue with that. Um, but these days, I really don't care. I bring my food to wherever it is. I don't tend to eat out. I don't tend to eat food other people have made. That's just a personal preference because I like my food. And if I go out, chances are what I'm going to get is not quite as good as what I make and I pay. So, no brainer. I stick with my food and I'm enjoying it and I'm loving it. And I'm really grateful that I got to share. Thank you very much. No matter what.